Hey there, Hefe. It's time for Collection Connection, the game that's just an excuse to talk about records. Last Tuesday, over on the Plastic Soundwave Cult channel, my brother Plastic Eric showed a record from his collection. As he mentioned in that video, it was an album that I gave to him, so we'll likely have one of those situations here where I have more to say about the album I'm connecting from than the one I'm connecting to. In any case, that record was the 1997 sophomore release from Ben Folds 5, Whatever and Ever, Amen. This is such a significant album for me, and after I attempt to explain to you why it's so important to me, I will connect it to a seemingly unrelated album from my own collection with which it shares something in common. Today, that album will skip us forward into the 21st century as I talk about the sixth album of psychedelic indie pop from the prolific Kevin Barnes, better known by the quote-unquote band name of Montreal, with Satanic Panic in the Attic from 2004. The challenge for you is to identify the common ground that they share from the information given over the course of the video, and then to put that guess in the comments, along with any conversation you want to have about the bands or the albums featured. The first correct answer will receive a shout out in my brother's next video. But first, let's officially reveal the connection between the prior pair of albums, those being Like Swimming from Morphine and Whatever and Ever Amen from Ben Folds 5, both from 1997. And the connection is that neither bands had guitarists in their lineup. In the case of Morphine, I do believe Mark Sandman would play guitar on occasion, so it's not as if there was no guitar on their records, but his primary instrument was the two-string bass. So in their normal course of things, there was no guitarist in the lineup. And with Ben Folds 5, I believe it's a situation where it came out where it just sort of, that's how the band came together, and then it became such a notable quirk of the band that they almost felt like they couldn't use guitar on a Ben Folds 5 record. And it makes me wonder if that contributed to why he wanted to go solo, if he felt constrained by, you actually couldn't have. It's not just that you didn't have a guitarist early on, but because you didn't and it sort of became part of your identity, then you couldn't do any guitar. Maybe they felt a little hamstrung by that, Ben Folds, personally. In any case, that was the connection. It was guessed by None Such Ned, but not just any None Such Ned, None Such Ned 94. So welcome back, Ned, and well done. Congratulations for guessing correctly. And with that, let's get on with the show. All right, so Ben Folds 5, Whatever and Ever Amen from 1997. As Eric said, this is a CD I bought for him back in the day, and it's funny a little bit that the gift of it was more selfish, I think, on my part. It was more like, hey, this is something I discovered that I really like, and you should listen to it. And I think I try to be more conscious these days of, this is something I think you would like. He said that he has come around to liking it fine. It didn't necessarily grab him initially, but not through any sort of natural resistance, just took some exposure to kind of come around to it. But I did give it to him, and the reason it was so important to me was that I had become so tuned out by the mid-90s to new music coming out. I still bought stuff, but most of the stuff that I bought was filling the gaps of the 80s bands that I still liked to listen to, filling in their discographies in my collection. The new stuff I was listening to, if you can call it that, was stuff like Dave Matthews Band and Blues Traveler, things that were like fine. They didn't super speak to me. I thought they were maybe even better than fine. I would say that they were fairly good, but it still wasn't the stuff that spoke to me the way a lot of my favorite bands did that just weren't making music in this time period. So I had gone to kind of ignoring, most of the music that was coming out, but this one song, Brick, was just profoundly different from anything that I was hearing on the radio, and it did get airplay. That is how I was exposed to it. It was such a different song. It sounded different than anything else that was being played at the time, and it thematically was very different. A song about an abortion that is so sort of heartrending that you almost couldn't believe it was a song, believe it was a single, certainly. And getting into the somewhat controversial, maybe, well, certainly abortion is controversial, but on top of that, the nuances of it, the male perspective, his own perspective on this real life incident that he wanted to write about but didn't know how to write about exactly. And he said that I think Darren Jesse in the band came up with the refrain of "She's a brick and I'm drowning slowly off the coast and headed nowhere." So just this feeling of being unmoored and wanting to support a person who went through something, very traumatic that he was responsible for in part, and wanting to support her, and not making her do it. This is, I've heard him tell the story. It was her choice to do it. He didn't want to do it, but he supported her in that and then tried to support her after that, but she was just depressed and going down, an emotional hole and dragging him with her. And the idea that the perhaps controversial idea that he was having an experience too, it doesn't take away from the legitimacy of her own experience, but becomes just a very interesting viewpoint on something. And that is something that comes up time and again in his lyrics. So based on that and the song catching my ear, I went out and bought the album. Thankfully, a lot of it is a lot more fun and playful and, big and loud and raucous, and kind of has a bit of a frat boy energy to it. But those lyrics that are just kind of raw nerve lyrics from Brick still show up, time and again in songs. There are several, as Eric mentioned, sort of breakup themed songs. One of them is very funny, a song for the dumped, where he's about as bratty as you can be about it. While at the other end of the spectrum, you have Selfless, Cold, and Composed, which I just love the nuance. He does very nuanced breakup songs where this is not a real life experience, or at least it's a reversal of a real life experience, where somebody sent him a letter, that someone he had broken up with, and sent him a letter saying that they were almost more upset that he wasn't upset than they were upset at the breakup. And so he kind of flips the narrative, takes the first person, and it's a song about that, about saying, man, I'm so torn up over our breakup, but what is really tearing me up is the fact that you don't seem to be that bothered by it, And so I love that song, Selfless, Cold, and Composed, I think is a great number. But then there's also, in that frat boy vein, things like The Battle of Who Could Care Less, which is kind of teasing the kind of the cooler than thou attitude, and he's trying to cheer somebody up by kind of goofing with them and pointing out kind of, how silly all the seriousness is, just making dumb jokes and failing to cheer them up, cursed with ennui, and he's trying to, come on, man, come around, life's fun, life's okay, life's whatever, which was another single. It was actually the first single, but other than Brick, I think Brick was the only one that made any real headway of his singles, period, throughout his career, which goes on to this day. And Whatever and Ever Amen was his most successful album. It's the only one to have gone platinum that I'm aware of. And I quickly went and bought his first album, which has more of the frat boy energy, but a lot of humor and still a lot of incisive lyrics. So I definitely recommend that one. And those two albums, along with Radiohead's OK Computer, really sort of rescued me and brought me back around to looking for current music to sort of revive my interest in new music. It just felt like I was already a dinosaur, in my mid-20s in the 90s, and I was only really interested in the music that I was becoming one of those people who the music from when I was in high school is the only music I want to listen to. But Ben Folds and Radiohead brought me out of that funk, made me realize that if you looked around a little bit, and this was sort of in the dawn of broad acceptance of the internet, broad availability of the internet. It was still slow, but you could, look things up, find things, and you weren't reliant solely on what you heard on the radio or on MTV back when they still played music. You could actually find and discover little things for yourself. And that's where I felt like I ended up with on the Radiohead and the Ben Folds 5. Went back, got that first Ben Folds 5 album, went back and discovered Radiohead's The Bends, which had come out and gone completely under my radar. Like everybody, I had enjoyed Creep and was aware of it, and of course it was a huge hit, but I never heard anything else off their first record, was completely unaware that their second record existed, and it wasn't until OK Computer got my attention that I started to find not only new music, but to go back kind of through the 90s a little bit and discover bands like Blur and the Cardigans and Bare Naked Ladies and other bands that could make music that appealed to me. Supergrass, if I didn't say them. Then I was able to sort of start to fill in those gaps of those missing years where I was just profoundly tuned out of what was going on because I didn't care for the stuff that was primarily being played on the radio. And this shift back out of the wilderness for me was so significant that it ended up being that to this day, I think of that 1997 cutoff point with Ben Folds and Radiohead. Everything that came after that I think of as new music, even though that was half my life ago now. I may have to come up with a third age, like Middle Earth. But yeah, that is sort of the break between what I think of as new music and old music. The stuff that I grew up listening to and learning to love and liking and collecting. That is just a really significant landmark, that 1997 thing that just brought me back and made me realize that there was still music that could speak to me, and I wasn't necessarily an old fart quite yet. But with that, let's wrap that up and move it on to the connection. And today we are connecting it to Satanic Panic in the Attic, the 2004 album from Of Montreal. Now, Of Montreal is one of those bands that's defined by one person, and that person is Kevin Barnes. And my understanding, which is not a deep understanding of this band, I have 3 of their albums. This one, which is the earliest of them that I have, even though it's, I believe, their 6th record. And then the Sunlandic Twins and Hissing Fauna, Are You the Destroyer? And those are 3 consecutive albums that came out in the mid-2000s. And I really like Satanic Panic in the Attic. And I felt like I was getting lesser returns on the other 2 as they went along. And it was becoming more esoteric. And they have song titles, that are the most sort of tongue-twistery, odd song titles this side of the Cocteau Twins, which I should mention I could have used also for this exact same connection, but I went, since I've talked about Cocteau Twins before, I went with a band that I haven't talked about, Of Montreal. But my understanding, without having heard any of the music, is that it started off as more of a band. It was certainly headed by Kevin Barnes, but more of a band effort. And by the time of Satanic Panic in the Attic, he had pulled back and was doing a print. So he was playing most of the music himself. There are a couple of guest credits on here, a guitarist on a couple of tracks, and a flute and a cello. But the rest of the music was all just Kevin Barnes, so it was kind of a solo act by this point. But that was a bit of a de-evolution from the origins of the band, and my understanding is that as the band has evolved, they have become more of a band again since this. But I haven't followed them since then. They've gone from this very sort of lo-fi psych pop to, my understanding is maybe more like in a funk territory. So this will be one, it'll be interesting to hear Eric's take on it. I could see him grooving on it immediately. It definitely feels like psychedelic in the sense that maybe things were consumed in the making of it and in the artwork, which is crazy, which was designed by his brother, actually, another Barnes whose name I forget. But the band is associated with the Elephant Six group, which was sort of started as a, funnily enough, like a fake sort of label for a bunch of four high school guys who were making music, making recordings and stuff, and in the way of the world, they gave themselves, a fake label to release their music on. That sort of evolved into a real thing, and two of the core members of this were Robert Schneider and Jeff Mangum, who would form the Apples in Stereo and Neutral Milk Hotel, respectively, and the other primary band associated with Elephant Six is Olivia Tremor Control. But outside of that, there's this sort of nebulous idea of Elephant Six that through a couple different places, Denver, Colorado, but primarily Athens, Georgia, and REM B-52s had nothing to do with this. This is much later, into the 90s, that people would sort of get folded in, and there was a lot of people, playing on other people's records. I think Robert Schneider produced some of the earliest Neutral Milk Hotel, and they would play on each other's albums and kind of a big swap. So everybody sort of had their primary project that they were on, but would contribute in other ways to other people. And Kevin Barnes, who was born in Ohio, but presumably maybe at college in Athens, Georgia, got folded into this, and his band Of Montreal shared, I think, some of the same attributes and also the same sound. I guess people were invited. They weren't necessarily signed to a label called Elephant Six, but they were invited by the initial group of guys to sort of be in the collective. And seems like it was more an idea, but it's very nebulous, and it's very hard to pin down exactly what Elephant Six is and what bands are considered Elephant Six bands. But they do include bands like Beulah, Ladybug Transistor, and the Essex Green, which may be my favorite of the Elephant Six related bands. But beyond that core of Apples in Stereo, Neutral Milk Hotel, and Olivia Tremor Control, everything just sort of became a further satellite out on this Elephant Six sort of cloud. All right, that took a hell of an explanation. But the sound then is the other thing that kind of contributed to it, would be the kind of reason why they would bring somebody in. And this has that very sort of bedroom lo-fi psych pop, but it is very hooky, like, the Apples in Stereo, and an indie and fuzzy, but like from the beginning, Disconnect the Dots, I think is catchy immediately, and maybe one of the slickest songs on the record. The entire record encompasses quite a bit of sound, quite a range of styles, even though the overall sheen kind of makes it fit in. I think maybe the only one that really sounds just completely different to everything is City Bird, which was one of the songs that first won me over. And it's more like a Nick Drake track. Very quiet and peaceful, acoustic guitar, and just an ode to birds in the city, seeming to forget that they can fly, and hanging around where the food is, but not expressing their freedom. It's like, hey man, you can fly anywhere, but you just hang around here and eat the scraps that we feed you. Why would you do that? So that's a very low-key, pretty song. Like I said, very sort of Nick Drake. But most of the music was much fuller, if lo-fi, like I said, but it contains, good harmonies. His voice is often double-tracked, and he's providing his own harmonies. As I said, some of these song titles are crazy, so I'm trying to remember some. Disconnect the Dots, great opener, and Lysergic Bliss is the second song, which is another one that I like a lot, and it's very fun and bouncy. And the record closes with Vegan in Furs, which seems to be a clear play on Venus in Furs, the Velvet Underground song. And that one's really good. That one is, kind of catchy and poppy. How Lester Lost His Wife is kind of a hard rockin' one. And the follow-up song to City Bird, Chrissy Kiss the Corpse, is the most upbeat, optimistic song about necrophilia you will ever hear. And it's pretty demented, but it's a lot of fun. And yeah, kind of throughout, the styles bounce around, so they don't sound like one thing, but it all sounds like it fits together, with the possible exception of City Bird, which is still a gorgeous track. And so I'm interested to see what Eric thinks about this. It is very psych inspired, but doesn't necessarily feel 60s to me. It almost feels like it's sitting on the precipice where psych kind of morphed into bubblegum by the early 70s, kind of not that this gets rid of what feels like drugginess with titles like Erroneous, I haven't even said the bad ones. Erroneous Escape into Eric Eccles is a bad one. Eros's Entropic Tundra is a mouthful. And then, like I said, Lysergic Bliss, and a song called Rapture Rapes the Muses, which I don't even know if I'm supposed to say, but it is a catchy pop song, I think kind of based on mythology. Yeah, so I really liked this album quite a bit, and so I was happy to follow them for another couple of albums. But again, I felt like I had those kind of disappointments, although I'm curious to go back and listen to them more, which I have done a little bit in the last couple days, to see if there was more there than I gave it credit for at the time. None of these had really been played back at all since about 2016 or so. So it's kind of reintroducing all of them, but this was the one, Satanic Panic in the Attic, which got the most plays. And I think it is just kind of a collection of songs. I also believe that very early on they were more like, what's the stupid word where there's a theme for the whole album? Concept albums. I think they were more conceptual throughout. These are maybe highly conceptual as songs and probably mean a lot to him, but a lot of them are very sort of dense and opaque if you maybe don't know all the words or the inspirations behind them. They're just very catchy songs that, again, kind of in that balance between bubblegum and more pure psych pop from the late 60s. So if that appeals to you, maybe give them a try. Of Montreal. I know that recently, 2020 or so, Kevin Barnes came out or declared himself sort of non-binary, genderqueer, and embraces all of the pronouns. He'll answer to him, her, them, kind of the whole gamut, I guess. But that's been a more recent development. That's something I just found out about while doing my research here. And so I just thought I would mention it, I guess. But yeah, Of Montreal. And if you think that you might know what the connection is between Satanic Panic in the Attic by Of Montreal and Whatever and Ever Amen from Ben Folds 5. And I will say that this is more about the band, so it's not specific to these albums. This was just the Of Montreal album that I felt like talking about. But it's something that applies to both bands. That's your clue, kind of along with the Cocteau Twins clue from earlier. And with that, yeah, if you think you know what the connection might be, leave that down in the comments. And the first right answer will get a shout out in Eric's next video, which will come out next Tuesday. So look forward to that. He will react to this album and connect to something from his own collection. And that will be next Tuesday on the Plastic Soundwave Cult channel. So with that, I said everything that I have got to say. So thanks for watching. Bye-bye.